Hi guys, Sandy here. I have taken apart an old winter coat. I had this kind of brownish burgundy almost wool coat that went down to almost the floor. Remember the old style from like maybe the 80s? I think it's probably that old. Could be the 90s. And it had like a little velvet stand-up collar and velvet on the sleeves. So I took it apart. I have cut it up and I'm working on some plans on what to do and how to refashion it. So I've decided on this Vogue 8841 pattern. It has this wrap style, which you see a lot on the runway for fall of 2020 with no buttons or anything. So that's super simple. The collar I like this big long collar with the red, but I don't want to put any fur on it. So I have a couple of options. I think this is the coat. This is actually the coat. Look at that, it's full of dog hair. This is actually the coat. These are my pattern pieces. Here's a quick tip. Never get those pattern pieces back in your envelope, right? Put them in a Ziploc baggie. So I've taken all the pieces apart. They're all over my tables. And then I was looking at, once I decided on the pattern, I knew I wanted a couple of contrasting fabrics, so I was trying to decide what to use. All right, the back piece got cut out fine, but now I'm trying to cut out the front piece, and we've run into a couple of issues. First of all, the pockets are underneath here, and I want to make sure that they're all lined up. Everything's lined up perfectly, so I have them pinned here. I have the underarm pinned so the two pieces, the two fronts aren't moving back and forth. And this, I want to make sure that from here where it was on the old coat to where the pockets were, I like the length, so I want to make sure that the edge of the underarm starts there. So I'm going to, that's my starting point. I have to make this a little bit wider through the middle, so that's not a problem letting this fall this way. My real issue is when I come to this shoulder, it's much wider than the old shoulder. So I think what I'm going to do is literally sew a triangle on there. I don't think anybody will really see it. And if you do see it, then maybe what I'll do is I'll put a piece of cording in there to make it look like a design detail, but I have to wait and see. And then the other issue, because this is a shawl collar and the other one wasn't, there isn't enough room here. So what I decided to do was I redesigned this. So I mean, original design did not have this black pleather going down, so I'm going to add here, I'm going to add a band of black pleather to make that wide enough so it fits on this. Now, I cut the back short because I'm going to add this giraffe print around the bottom. So I cut the back short. I actually cut it off right at the kick pleat. And then I can decide whether I want to apply that, depending on the length, when I look at it, apply it on top or add it on, and then I'll deal with the kick pleat then if I have to. If I don't have to, I won't. So I want to make sure that my back underarm and my front underarm line up. Whoop, line up. And then I can determine how long I want to make this front piece. So I'm just going to plunk my ruler down there, and then that will tell me how long to make this front piece. So they'll both be the same. Oh, excuse me. And then I'm going to cut this out as best I can and then determine how to put that leather on. I suspect I'll just overlay it, and I'll just add a piece here of the wool and then overlay the leather over it so you won't even know that there's a seam there. We'll see how that goes. All right, so my front piece is cut out. I have a couple of decisions to make. I made sure the pockets were in the right place because I measured them down from the underarm. So those are in the right place. And I made this edge a little wider because I need a little bit more space through the middle. I shortened it to the length, the same length as the back, so that's okay. The neck edge has some issues. The arm has some issues. So I have this little opening here where I don't have enough fabric. So I am going to sew another piece of fabric to this fabric. I think what I'll do is I probably put just a little bit of black leather piping in there, so it'll end up being on this part. Since there's going to be piping around the sleeve, the arm hole, I'm going to add some piping there, so it'll add a nice little detail. and then the front becomes a problem. So this is much wider, but it has a really wide lapel. So see how wide that lapel is. So taking this off is just going to narrow this lapel a little bit. I just need to make sure that the facing matches this. So I'm not worried about that at all. But my big problem is that there were buttonholes in this, and I took the buttonholes out. So what I am going to do is add a strip over this of, I'm just going to patch this so there's some, it's the same consistency. So I'm going to take some of this fabric that I have left over and wool and patch these. I have them on both. I have one on that one and two on this one, and patch them. And then I'm going to overlay a strip of leather all the way down both sides of the front. So instead of having just the giraffe, I'm going to have, my drawings are awful, I apologize. I'm going to have this strip of leather coming down, which actually will be a nice detail because it's going to give me a nice vertical line. So that'll give me some length. And then I'll determine what I'm going to do about the bottom. I haven't decided if I like this length or if I'm going to make it a little bit longer. I can either put the giraffe banding up here if I like the length. It's kind of a car coat length, and I kind of like that. If I want it a little longer, I will add it onto the bottom. So we'll see. This is kind of the design as you go process. So I'm going to put the front together and add the leather on and see what happens, and then onto sleeves. All right, the sleeve presents a whole different issue because the sleeve on the coat was 2 pieces, and I actually unstitched them, so I have a seam allowance here already, so that is going to save me a little bit. So I'm going to butt these sleeves together, and I'm going to kind of give them a little bit of a shove up here. Even though this might not be as flat as I want it, it's the best I'm going to get because I really need 12 inches under the from the bottom of the shoulder. So I really need this to be 12 inches, right? So I want this, let me push this over a little bit. I want this sleeve to fit on here at 12 inches. So I think that's going to work. And get that up there like that. I've got 12 inches, and then that gives me the opportunity to put the giraffe down at the bottom down here. And this sleeve is probably 5 inches too long for me anyway. So I think that's going to work, and I'm going to end up putting a piece of cording going right down the middle of the sleeve. So we're going to cut the sleeves out and cord those together. Okay, we are making progress. I finished both sleeves. I added a piece of cording down the center of the sleeve. So I have both sleeves done. I sewed the back together, and this jacket actually has 2 darts at the shoulders. So I just put a center back seam and the 2 darts at the shoulders. Wow, is there a lot of dog hair on that? And then we had a little problem with the front with the buttons. So I patched those pieces, and what I did was I added a piece on, and I used the piece with the interfacing because why would I want to put new interfacing on it, right? But it's the same thickness. So I just zigzagged all around the edges there, and what happened is I came up with this side's done, and then you can see I went back and I just trimmed it all away. So it's a little double thickness there, but not much. Then now I need to add that band going down the front, so I cut a 6-inch band because I wasn't sure how long I wanted to use it, and I sewed it 2 3/8 inch in all the way down the front because I want it to cover these. So now I am going to pull it forward, right? Make it nice and pretty and wrap it around to the inside. And I think what I'm going to do, because I really don't want to have a lot of top stitching on here, is I might run a narrow stitch in the ditch here, but then when I get around to the other side to hold it in place, I think I'm going to stitch it by hand. This vinyl is pretty good with hand stitching because it's all going to be covered by the facing. So I don't care what the inside looks like right now, but I do care about the outside. And I love the look of this banding. And you know, I could have added on the banding here instead of covering over the jacket, and that would have solved a lot of construction problems. But I need the weight. This is lovely, but it's so flimsy, it won't work for the jacket. So I need the weight of the wool underneath it. But once that's smoothed out and wrapped around, I do think I might just do a little tiny bead going down there so it almost looks like cording. The same, sort of the same distance as this one, just so it has that same kind of look, and that will keep it in place, and then I can wrap it around to the other side. So we have like a 3-inch black band going down the front. So I'm going to finish the fronts, and then I still have this little piece of sleeve I have to add on here. So I'm going to add a shoulder, sorry. I'm going to add a piece of cording, and I'm going to add just a big piece on and then lay the pattern over it and trim it off so it actually is the right size, because it's my armhole. I need that arm to fit in there. So yeah, we're making good progress. I'm going to add a piece in here, and I thought what I would do is just add a piece with some trim. So I took a remnant, because I have to do it for both shoulders. I took a remnant and I added my cording on, and then I'm just going to sew that on there like that, and then lay my pattern back over it and cut it out. So there'll be this little tiny piece of cording. Look at the pattern here. Right here, there'll be this little line of cording going across there in black. So it'll just add a detail. It'll look like it was on purpose instead of by accident. The other thing that I decided to do, and you know, when you design on the fly, things change as you go. I decided to take this out, partly because I didn't have enough fabric of the giraffe, because it's leftovers from my daughter's vest, but also partly because I've got all of these linear lines here, and I decided these horizontal lines, and I decided that that would just make it look shorter, obviously. And then this one is so long and so nice, not to mention the fact that the jacket is just at the right length that I want it right now, so it's going to end up looking like that, which actually is much cleaner than this, right? That's pretty busy, especially if it's only like 4 or 5 inches. So I think that that looks better, and that's part of the design as you go process, right? You start to put things together and they don't look quite the way they looked in your head, so you just modify as you go. So I'm pretty excited. I am going to finish sewing down the faux leather, and then sew the corner pieces on and get those recut. So my fronts and my backs, all my pieces are ready to go and ready to assemble. So I'm pretty excited. The next step will be putting the facing on and sewing it all together. We have the collar on. Pretty excited about that. It looks great. And I ended up top stitching it because this upholstery fabric is bouncy, so it wasn't laying very flat. And then for the facing, I put the facing on to the front of the jacket, and again, it's super bouncy, and I understitched it. You can see here I understitched it, but it's still like when I'm not happy with the way this is coming around, and it's not because it's not lined. The lining isn't pulling that facing piece into the back of the jacket, and even I think if it was lined, it would still be pretty bouncy. So I ended up, look at how nice that looks. I ended up stitching in the ditch here along this piece of pleather that I added, and now there's no rolls going on, as opposed to this side that hasn't been stitched, and it keeps rolling to the front. Even with the understitching, it's just not laying flat. So I'm gonna stitch in the ditch. That was a really good solution. And then the rest of the collar, I'm just going to fold this under the inside collar and hand stitch it in place, and the facing also, because I took the pattern and kind of mishmashed it together. There are pieces that need to be fitted, and so I'm going to do those all by hand. But I'm pretty pleased with the way it's looking right now. It's looking pretty good. All right, the sleeves are done, the top sleeve, and this facing is done. So now I just have to finish the sleeve. What I'm going to do is add a row of this piping, this great faux leather piping that I made. I'm going to add a row of that to the bottom here, and then and I have a thread, drive me crazy. And then I'm going to add a row of the giraffe onto the bottom of the sleeve. I was hoping I had enough to do a cuff. I don't think I'm going to. I think it's just going to be a piece around the sleeve, but with the little leather trim separating the two, I think that will be really cute. And then I have to hem it, and I was going to, initially I had thought I was going to put the giraffe around the bottom, but I've decided not to do that. It's going to be too much. And I'm going to just make a facing and stitch the facing on the bottom because I really don't have enough to hem it. It will be too short if I do that. So I'm going to stitch facing on there, and that will give me a good hem. And what else? I think that's probably it. I have to make a belt. And if I have enough of the giraffe left, I will use that for a belt and trim it out with the leather. So we'll see. Yeah, I only have handwork left to do, so I'm pretty happy about that. I ended up on the sleeve, so you can see I have the sleeve. There's that leather piece coming down because it's a two-piece sleeve. And I wanted to make this big enough to fold it back, but I didn't have enough of the giraffe left. I'm like really struggling. So I ended up putting a piece of leather. I bound it on top of some of the very last piece I had of the coat. And so that seemed to work pretty well. And then I'm just going to fold the giraffe so I have a little cuff like that. So that's good to go. And then I finished top stitching in the ditch here on both of these pieces. I have to hand stitch the inside of all the collar and everything and get all of that pieced because it's not lined and the pattern calls for lining. I want to actually do this by hand. I'll get a much better finish. And then for the hem, because I didn't have enough of the coat, I ended up, and I didn't have enough of the giraffe to put a binding on around the bottom, and I decided I didn't like the band anyway. I ended up piecing together a whole bunch of these little 3-inch strips of the giraffe and sewing them to the hem of the coat, and I'm going to use that as a hem, as a finish hem. So I'm only losing like a 1/2 inch on the length, and then I'll just hand stitch that down. And so in the inside it looks kind of nice because it matches up with the facing. And yeah, put a label in it and it's done. I'm really happy. So it needs a good cleaning between the dog hair and the little stuff from this upholstery fabric is everywhere. But outside of that, I took that great big old 40-year-old coat, it's like 2020, right? 35, 40-year-old coat, and made it into something that's modern and wearable. Yeah, and doesn't look like I'm wearing someone else's overcoat that's dragging on the ground. So I'm pretty happy about that. And I hope you enjoy the photo.